The day I inherited the water rights to a 2,100-acre lake, I thought I'd won the lottery. What I actually got was a war with the most vindictive HOA president who'd ever lived. I'm standing on my great-grandfather's 1887 dock, breathing in that sweet pine and lake water smell, when this white Escalade screeches up my gravel drive. Out steps Cordelia Blackwood, perfectly coiffed, designer blazer, clutching a violation notice like it's the Constitution itself. 500 monthly lake access fee, dock removal, immediately. Here's what made my blood boil. She's demanding I pay her to access my 2,100 acres of inherited water rights. But Cordelia didn't know about the original deed in my jacket, the one that made me legally untouchable. What would you do if your HOA tried to steal your water rights inheritance? Where are you watching from? Bet you have HOA horror stories too, because Cordelia's about to lose everything. Let me back up and tell you how I got here. My name's Ezra Whitmore, and 6 months ago I was just another divorced guy trying to rebuild his life. 42 years old, former Army engineer turned small-town contractor, living in a cramped apartment and wondering where the hell everything went wrong. Then Uncle Morris died. I'm sitting in lawyer Harold Pemberton's office, breathing in that musty smell of old legal documents mixed with burnt coffee, when he slides this thick manila envelope across his worn leather desk. The chair creaks under my weight as I lean forward. Your great-grandfather Silas was quite the businessman, Harold says. Bought 2,100 acres around Mirror Lake back in 1887. Water rights, mineral rights, the whole 9 yards. Ezra, you just inherited one of the most valuable properties in 3 counties. The lake itself is pristine, crystal clear water surrounded by towering pines. Some cabins are original family builds from the 1900s. Others are massive McMansions that sprouted up when developers moved in 15 years ago. There's one complication, Harold warns. The Homeowners Association, run by a woman named Cordelia Blackwood, real estate attorney turned HOA dictator. She's been systematically targeting anyone who doesn't fit her country club vision. I should have listened. 3 days later, I'm checking out my new dock when expensive tires crunch on gravel. Out steps a woman who looks like she irons her money. Perfectly coiffed silver hair, designer blazer, and eyes like a loan shark who just spotted fresh prey. You must be the new property owner, she announces, not asking. I'm Cordelia Blackwood, HOA president. She's clutching a violation notice like it's a weapon. Ezra Whitmore, nice dock, isn't it? My great-grandfather built it. Her smile could make polar bears shiver. This structure violates current safety codes. 30 days removal. Plus there's a $500 monthly lake access fee. I almost choke. Lady, I own this lake. Community asset, she corrects. Previous owners never properly registered with HOA oversight. She slaps the violation notice against my truck windshield like she's serving a warrant. Failure to comply results in daily fines and potential foreclosure proceedings. Here's the thing about bullies. They always pick the wrong fight eventually. What Cordelia doesn't know is I spent 8 years reading engineering contracts and water management law. More importantly, I've got allies she hasn't counted on. My neighbor Mavis Lane has lived here since before the HOA existed. 78 years old, sharp as a tack, and madder than hell about what Cordelia's been doing to longtime residents. She forced out 3 families last year, Mavis tells me later, her voice shaking with fury. Made up violations, assessed bogus fees until they couldn't afford to fight anymore. Then there's Deputy Roy Hutchins. Good man, fair cop, and he's been watching Cordelia's selective enforcement for years. She only targets certain types, he mentions quietly. Folks who don't drive the right cars or join the right clubs. And young Tommy Reeves, fresh law school graduate looking to make his mark. Kids eager, hungry, and when I mention water rights from 1887, his eyes light up like Christmas morning. The violation notice is still stuck to my windshield, fluttering in the evening breeze. The crisp paper feels like a declaration of war in my hands. Standing there listening to water lap against century-old dock posts, I realize Cordelia just made a crucial mistake. She picked a fight with an Army engineer who knows the difference between legitimate authority and petty tyranny. Someone who's read enough legal documents to know that pre-1900 water rights are basically untouchable. Someone with absolutely nothing left to lose. But mostly she picked a fight with a guy whose family built this place with their bare hands, and who's not about to let some power-hungry real estate lawyer steal it with paperwork and intimidation. Game on, Cordelia. Cordelia wasn't kidding about her paperwork fetish. 2 days after our little lakeside chat, a certified letter shows up requiring signature. Inside? A legal demand for complete property survey, environmental impact assessment, and something called a compliance audit, all at my expense, naturally. The letter's got more fancy letterhead than a congressional hearing, and every paragraph drips with legal threats. Failure to provide comprehensive documentation within 14 days will result in daily fines of $10,000 for unauthorized lake modifications. 10,000. Daily. I'm reading this thing in my kitchen, and I swear I can smell Cordelia's overpriced perfume coming off the paper. She's trying to bury me in costs before I even know what I'm fighting. But here's where her plan hits its first snag. See, I didn't spend 8 years building bridges in Afghanistan without learning that the devil's always in the details, and these details have more holes than a Swiss cheese convention. First stop, the county courthouse basement. If you've never been down there, imagine a library designed by someone who hates both books and people. Fluorescent lights buzz like angry wasps. Everything smells like dust and forgotten dreams. And the filing clerk looks like she predates the building itself. I'm 3 hours deep in musty records when I find it. The original Whitmore deed, filed in 1887 and never superseded. Back in my Army days, I learned that old engineering contracts often contained clauses that modern lawyers miss. And this deed is no exception. My great-grandfather didn't just buy lake property. He secured water rights extending 200 feet below the lake bottom, mineral extraction rights, and something called riparian authority. Turns out riparian authority basically makes me the water king of this entire area. Who knew Great-Grandpa Silas was such a shrewd negotiator? Better yet, the HOA was never legally granted authority over pre-existing properties. They just assumed they had it, and everyone was too intimidated to check. Time for professional help. Tommy Reeves meets me at the local diner. This kid's so eager he's practically vibrating. Fresh out of law school, sharp suit that's seen better days, and the kind of hunger that comes from needing to prove yourself. "Mr. Whitmore," he says, spreading my documents across a sticky table. "This is extraordinary. In law school, they taught us that pre-1900 water rights are almost impossible to challenge because they predate modern regulatory frameworks. And this riparian authority clause, you don't just own the lake, you control water flow for the entire watershed." The waitress refills our coffee and Tommy's explaining grandfather clauses when my phone buzzes. Text from an unknown number. "Emergency HOA meeting tonight, mandatory attendance, rogue property owner situation." I show Tommy the message. He grins like a shark who just smelled blood. "They're panicking," he says. "Cordelia's calling an emergency meeting because she knows she overplayed her hand. But every procedural violation they commit tonight becomes evidence for our countersuit." The community center that evening looks like a courtroom designed by someone who shopped exclusively at garage sales. Folding chairs arranged in hostile rows, bright lights that make everyone look guilty, and the smell of stale coffee mixed with nervous sweat and whatever industrial disinfectant they use to mop these floors. Cordelia's set up front like a prosecutor, complete with poster boards and what I'm guessing are fabricated charts about lake safety violations. Her HOA board flanks her, 3 country club refugees who look like they've never seen actual manual labor. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cordelia begins, her voice echoing off cheap paneling, "we have a situation that threatens our entire community's property values and safety standards." She's pointing at blown-up photos of my dock like it's evidence in a murder trial. "This unauthorized structure violates current engineering standards and poses immediate environmental hazards." That's when I stand up, Tommy beside me with a briefcase full of legal ammunition. "Ms. Blackwood," I say, using that command tone they drill into you in the Army, "I've got some documentation you might want to see." The room goes dead quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and someone's rumbling stomach 3 rows back. Tommy opens the briefcase and pulls out the original deed, authenticated by the county clerk that afternoon. "This property predates your HOA by 135 years. Mr. Whitmore's family has maintained continuous legal ownership, including all water rights since 1887. Cordelia's face cycles through about 6 shades of pale. "Those documents are irrelevant technicalities. The HOA has recognized jurisdiction over all lakefront properties. Actually," Tommy continues, spreading photocopies for everyone to see, You have no legal authority over pre-existing properties. None. And attempting to assess fees for water access you don't control constitutes theft of services. I watch Cordelia's perfectly composed mask start to crack. Her hands are actually shaking as she shuffles through her poster boards looking for some comeback that doesn't exist. Furthermore, I add, I'd like to know who authorized spending HOA funds on legal threats against property owners you have no jurisdiction over. That question hits the room like a grenade. Several residents start whispering, and I catch phrases like, "Where does our money go?" and "Never voted on this." Cordelia's mini twist? She doubles down. This meeting is over. All violations stand pending legal review. But walking out only makes her look desperate. Game 1 to us. Cordelia's next move came faster than I expected, and it was pure bureaucratic warfare at its finest. 3 days after that disastrous HOA meeting, I wake up to the sound of diesel engines rumbling up my gravel drive. Through my kitchen window, I watch not one, not two, but 3 different county vehicles park in my yard like it's a federal raid on a moonshine operation. Out step the enforcement squad, building inspector, septic inspector, and environmental compliance officer. All carrying clipboards, all wearing that grim expression government workers get when someone's made their morning miserable with paperwork. "Mr. Whitmore?" The building inspector's a decent guy named Pete, who I recognize from around town. He looks about as thrilled to be here as a vegetarian at a barbecue contest. We've received multiple anonymous complaints about unpermitted modifications and potential septic violations. We're required to investigate. Anonymous complaints. Right. I'm betting Cordelia's fingerprints are all over this, along with that expensive perfume that probably costs more than most people's car payments. They spend the morning crawling around my property like ants at a picnic. Pete's checking dock measurements, the septic guy's poking around the leach field with a metal rod that sounds like a dinner bell every time it hits stone, and the environmental officer is taking water samples like he's investigating the next Chernobyl. The whole time, I'm documenting everything with my phone camera. 8 years in the Army teaches you that when bureaucrats show up en masse, you better have your own evidence ready. I'm leaning against the old oak tree that's probably been watching this lake since before automobiles were invented, feeling the rough bark against my back and thinking about how my great-grandfather would have handled government inspectors, probably with a shotgun and a lot less patience. "Mr. Whitmore," Pete calls out after 2 hours, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I've got to tell you, your property's in better shape than most places I inspect. Dock meets current engineering standards. Septic systems actually newer than required, and your shoreline restoration work exceeds environmental guidelines." That's when it hits me. All these violations Cordelia's been screaming about, complete fiction. But here's where the day gets interesting. While they're documenting my supposedly dangerous property, I'm documenting them. And Deputy Roy Hutchins, who just happens to be driving by during his patrol, stops to check on the commotion. "Funny thing, Ezra," Roy says, adjusting his hat against the afternoon sun. "Got 3 anonymous complaints this week, all from the same phone number. Same number that's been filing reports against longtime residents for months. Pattern's getting pretty obvious." Now that's what I call evidence. Cordelia's been weaponizing county resources as her personal harassment squad. That evening, Tommy shows up at my place with a legal pad covered in notes and the kind of excitement that comes from striking gold. "Ezra, you're not going to believe what I discovered while researching property boundaries." He spreads out a survey map on my kitchen table, pointing to lines that extend way further than I realized. "See this easement running along the waterfront? It cuts right through the middle of Cordelia's precious mansion property. Her dock, her boathouse, half her landscaping, it's all sitting on your family's land." I nearly choke on my coffee. "You're telling me the HOA queen's been trespassing on my property?" "Gets better." Tommy grins like he just won the lottery. The HOA never filed proper easement agreements when they incorporated. Back in law school, they taught us that easement violations can void entire development agreements. If they've been operating on invalid land use assumptions for 15 years, their whole legal framework could be meaningless. The pieces are clicking together like a perfectly engineered mechanism. Tommy pulls out more documents, his excitement building. "I've been digging through HOA financial records, the public ones anyway. They've spent over $40,000 on legal fees this year alone, all targeting specific homeowners. Never put it to a member vote, never disclosed where the money was going." "Let me guess," I say. watching his expression confirm my suspicions. All targeting people who don't fit Cordelia's vision of suburban paradise? Exactly. And here's the beautiful part. Every single legal action was based on false premises. She's been using HOA funds to finance personal vendettas. The next morning brings another certified letter, but this time I'm ready. Cordelia's demanding immediate compliance with updated lake access regulations and threatening liens on my property for unpaid fees. I call Tommy immediately. Time to go on offense, draft a formal response citing easement violations and unauthorized use of HOA funds. Make sure to mention that any liens filed against superior property rights constitute fraud. Already working on it, Tommy says. But Ezra, when people like Cordelia get cornered, they don't surrender quietly. They get desperate. Looking out at my lake, I watch evening light dance across water that's belonged to my family longer than this entire community has existed. Cordelia wants escalation? She's about to learn that some of us know how to fight back, and we fight to win. If I thought Cordelia was desperate before, I was about to learn what real desperation looked like. A week after Tommy's easement bombshell, she pulled out what she probably thought was her nuclear option, claiming authority over the lake's water levels themselves. The emergency HOA notice showed up on a Tuesday morning, delivered by some kid who looked like he'd rather be delivering pizza to a leper colony. Environmental emergency, immediate action required, blazed across the top in red letters that screamed panic, followed by enough bureaucratic word salad to choke a government lawyer. According to Cordelia's latest masterpiece, my dock posed an immediate environmental hazard during current drought conditions, and the HOA was temporarily assuming water management authority to protect community assets. She'd hired an environmental consultant, Dr. Marcus Pembroke, who'd supposedly determined that my century-old dock was somehow disrupting the lake's natural ecosystem. I'm reading this garbage while drinking my morning coffee, and honestly, the paper might as well have been scented with ode to desperation. The sheer audacity of claiming authority over water levels in a lake my family has owned since before her great-grandmother learned to walk? That takes some serious brass. But here's where Cordelia made her first major tactical error. When you spend 8 years as an Army engineer building water management systems in places where one mistake floods a village, you learn a few things about hydrology. And when you've been swimming in a lake since you could walk, you know exactly how Mother Nature handles her business. Mirror Lake isn't some artificial pond dependent on municipal water systems. It's fed by an underground spring system that's been flowing steadily since the last ice age. I remember Uncle Morris explaining this when I was 12, pointing out how the water stays crystal clear even during heavy rains because the springs provide constant circulation. That afternoon, I take a drive around the lake perimeter, something I haven't done since moving back. The crunch of gravel under my tires brings back childhood memories, but now I'm seeing everything with engineer's eyes. And that's when I spot something that makes my heart race: the original Watergate valve system, hidden in a grove of willows about halfway around the lake. It's a beautiful piece of 19th century engineering, heavy iron mechanisms that control flow between the main lake and the overflow channels. The smooth, worn handle feels solid under my hands, like it's been waiting over a century for someone who understands its purpose. Back in engineering school, they taught us that whoever controls water flow controls everything downstream. My great-grandfather Silas clearly understood that principle. That evening, Cordelia escalates to media warfare. The local newspaper runs a front-page story about selfish property owners threatening community environmental standards, complete with quotes from her pet consultant about unauthorized water management and potential ecosystem disruption. Dr. Marcus Pembroke, it turns out, has a degree from some online university that probably advertises during late-night TV infomercials. His environmental report reads like it was written by someone whose idea of wildlife observation involves the Discovery Channel. But I've got allies too. My letter to the editor, polished by Tommy's legal expertise, hits the paper 3 days later with enough technical details about spring-fed lake systems to make it clear that Cordelia's consultant couldn't identify a natural water source if it was flooding his basement. The real intelligence comes when Mavis Lane shows up with homemade cookies and the kind of gossip that changes everything. "That woman's been busy making promises," she says, settling into my kitchen chair with the satisfied expression of someone about to drop a bombshell. Cordelia's been talking to folks about a lakefront development project. Upscale condos, marina, the whole 9 yards. Problem is, she needs guaranteed water access to secure the development financing. Can't build a luxury lake community if some guy with century-old water rights can turn off the tap. Now we're getting to the truth. This isn't about environmental protection, it's about a multi-million-dollar development deal that requires control over my water rights. There's more, Mavis continues, leaning forward conspiratorially. My friend Betty at the county clerk's office says someone's been pulling property records on every parcel within half a mile of the water. Recent stuff, like they're planning something big. Tommy arrives just as Mavis finishes her intelligence briefing, carrying a folder that practically screams, "smoking gun." I've been auditing HOA finances through public records requests, he says, spreading documents across my table. They're not just overspending, they're broke. Reserve funds down to 3 months of operating expenses. If they can't generate major new revenue soon, they're looking at bankruptcy or crushing special assessments on homeowners. The picture becomes crystal clear. Cordelia's not just power-hungry, she's financially desperate. She needs my water rights to legitimize a development deal that'll save the HOA from bankruptcy and make her wealthy in the process. But she's forgotten something fundamental about water. It always finds its own level, and it always flows toward truth. Time to remind her who really controls the flow around here. Tommy's discovery hit me like a freight train loaded with dynamite. 3 weeks of digging through public records had uncovered something that made Cordelia's water rights grab look like petty shoplifting. "Ezra," Tommy says, spreading bank statements across my kitchen table like evidence in a murder trial, "you need to see this." The papers smell like fresh ink and pending doom. Over the past 3 years, the Lakeshore Estates HOA has hemorrhaged money faster than a punctured fire hose. But it's not just overspending, it's systematic theft. Look at these consulting fees. Tommy points to payments that make my engineering brain start connecting dots. Blackwood Environmental Solutions, Cordelia Consulting LLC, Lakeshore Property Management, all shell companies registered to the same address. Let me guess. Cordelia's? Her business office. She's been paying herself consulting fees for services the HOA never voted to authorize. Environmental assessments, legal research, property management, all at premium rates. The numbers are staggering. Over 3 years, Cordelia has funneled nearly $200,000 in HOA funds through fake companies. Money homeowners paid for actual services has financed her personal real estate ventures. You know what they say about people who steal from their neighbors? It takes a special kind of stupid to embezzle from folks who live close enough to egg your house. Here's where it gets ugly, Tommy continues. She's been using HOA funds as seed money for her lakefront development scheme. These property option agreements show she's quietly securing lakefront parcels. The contracts reveal Cordelia's been paying option fees and deposits with stolen HOA money. The development project isn't just a dream, it's an active conspiracy requiring my water rights to succeed. If she controls water access, she guarantees developers their investment is protected, I realize. Without my water rights, the whole deal collapses. Exactly. And she's personally liable for every unauthorized expenditure. Tommy's excitement builds like a prosecutor who just found the smoking gun. HOA board members have fiduciary duty to the community. Violating that creates both civil and criminal liability. The printer whirs again, generating more evidence. Back in Afghanistan, we learned that information warfare often beats firepower, and Tommy's building quite an arsenal. There's more, he says, pulling out correspondence that makes his eyes light up like Christmas morning. Letters between Cordelia and Pinnacle Lake Development Corporation. They're promising her a 20% finder's fee on total project value, multi-million-dollar payday if she delivers guaranteed water access. Now I understand the desperation. This isn't about community standards. Cordelia's been systematically robbing her neighbors to finance a get-rich scheme that requires destroying my family's water rights. Best part? Tommy grins like a shark smelling blood. She's left a paper trail a blind investigator could follow. Bank records, emails, property filings, all documented. I walk to my window, looking out at the lake that's been the center of this conspiracy. The afternoon light makes the water look like liquid gold, and I'm thinking about how greed makes people spectacularly stupid. What kind of exposure are we talking about? Civil restitution for embezzled funds, criminal charges for theft and fraud, personal liability for development losses, plus potential federal charges if this crossed state lines. He pauses, savoring the moment. Oh, and automatic removal from the HOA board for fiduciary violations. Perfect irony. Cordelia's been so busy trying to steal my water rights that she's built a financial house of cards about to collapse on her head. Every aggressive move has created more evidence of her crimes. When do we lower the boom? Tommy's smile could power half the county. Soon. But first, let's make sure she digs deeper. Desperate people make bigger mistakes. Looking at those documents, I realize we're not just fighting for my property anymore. We're about to expose a criminal conspiracy that's been robbing this entire community for years. Cordelia has no idea what's coming. The next morning, my kitchen looks like a war room designed by caffeinated lawyers with trust issues. Tommy's got his laptop open, Deputy Roy's nursing his third cup of coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and I've got engineering diagrams spread across every available surface. The smell of determination mixes with French roast and just a hint of impending revenge. All right, I say, pulling out a legal pad that's about to become our declaration of war. Cordelia's made this personal. Time to return the favor with interest. Roy leans back, his chair creaking like old bones. From law enforcement perspective, we need evidence so solid it could survive a nuclear attack. Financial crimes are tricky. Juries want documentation they can understand. Way ahead of you, Tommy says, fingers flying across his keyboard like he's composing a symphony of justice. I've prepared a formal complaint for the state HOA oversight board, plus whistleblower protection paperwork for when this goes federal. But I'm thinking bigger picture. 8 years of military engineering taught me that the best operations hit multiple targets simultaneously, like a perfectly coordinated artillery strike. We need 3 angles, I explain, sketching our strategy. Legal, financial, and physical evidence gathering. The legal strategy belongs to Tommy, and he's building a case that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. Every bogus violation, every unauthorized expenditure, every abuse of power gets cataloged with dates, amounts, and supporting documentation. Here's what I learned in law school about fiduciary duty, Tommy explains, pulling up case law that makes his eyes gleam. When HOA board members breach their responsibility to act in the community's best interest, they don't just owe back the money they stole, they're liable for all damages, legal costs, property damage, punitive damages, the works. That's like finding out the person who dented your car also has to buy you a new one, plus pay for your emotional trauma and cover your grocery bills for a year. Roy's handling the criminal angle, quietly building a case that'll eventually land on the state attorney general's desk. 20 years of police work taught me that people who abuse authority always escalate. Cordelia's pattern of false reports and harassment, that's a whole separate set of criminal charges. My contribution is the physical evidence, where my engineering background becomes our secret weapon. I've been installing a security camera network around my property, positioned to capture any sabotage while documenting the actual condition of my supposedly dangerous facilities. But the real trap involves something Cordelia doesn't know exists, a comprehensive water monitoring system. Using the same flood management sensors we deployed in Afghanistan, I'm creating scientific documentation of the lake's natural patterns. The cool metal feels familiar in my hands as I install sensors at dawn, hidden among cattails that smell like morning dew and ancient secrets. Modern water monitoring equipment provides court-admissible documentation, and Cordelia's about to learn that century-old water rights come with 21st century evidence gathering. Every time she claims water management authority, we'll have precise measurements proving her consultant couldn't identify water if he was drowning in it, I explained to my co-conspirators. Meanwhile, Mavis has organized the longtime residents into what she calls the Resistance. Think book club meets intelligence operation. These folks remember community life before Cordelia's reign of terror, and they've been documenting years of abuse. Mrs. Martinez kept every HOA communication for 5 years, Mavis reports during one strategy session, the rustle of papers sounding like ammunition being loaded. Shows clear targeting of Hispanic families while ignoring actual violations from Cordelia's country club cronies. Tommy's eyes light up like slot machines hitting jackpot. Discriminatory enforcement based on ethnicity, that's federal civil rights violation territory. The media strategy falls to me, and I've been cultivating Sarah Lane at the regional newspaper. When she learns about systematic embezzlement tied to a multi-million-dollar development scheme, her investigative instincts kick into overdrive. This story has everything, Sarah tells me over coffee, her recorder capturing every detail. Corruption, stolen funds, elderly abuse. It's the kind of expose that wins journalism awards. Our secret weapon is timing. We're planning the reveal during the HOA's annual meeting, when state law requires maximum attendance and financial transparency. Cordelia thinks she's orchestrating her final power play, but she's actually walking into a public execution. Multiple exposure routes, I explain, spreading backup plans across my table. If she discovers the investigation early, we've got the media, state oversight board, and criminal charges ready to deploy. The beauty is that every day Cordelia continues her schemes, she creates more evidence. Desperation makes people sloppy, and sloppy criminals make spectacular mistakes. Roy stands, adjusting his duty belt with the satisfaction of someone about to serve justice. 20 years taught me the best way to catch criminals is letting them think they're winning right up until the handcuffs click. Looking at our battle plans, I realize we've created something Cordelia never expected. A coordinated response from people who refuse to be bullied by petty tyrants with clipboards and attitudes. She's about to learn that some fights you just can't win. Desperation, it turns out, makes people do incredibly stupid things. And Cordelia Blackwood was about to prove that theory with the subtlety of a freight train hitting a nitroglycerin factory. It started with the private investigator, some guy in a rumpled suit and discount sunglasses who thought he was invisible while sitting in his Honda Civic outside the local diner. I spotted him immediately. When you've spent years in places where bad surveillance gets you killed, you develop a sixth sense about amateur hour operations. "Tommy," I said after finishing my eggs, "we've got company. White Honda, 3 o'clock, guy with a camera who apparently learned detective work from watching Miami Vice reruns." Tommy nearly choked on his coffee, craning his neck to look. "She hired a PI? That's either really desperate or really stupid." "Por qué no los dos?" I suggested, waving cheerfully at our wannabe spy as we walked past his car. The poor guy practically dove under his dashboard like he was dodging sniper fire, but hiring incompetent surveillance was just the opening act. 2 nights later, I'm yanked awake by the sound of someone thrashing around my dock at 2 a.m. like a drunk beaver with power tools. Through my bedroom window, I can see a small boat bobbing in the moonlight, and whoever's in it is doing something that involves a lot of splashing and creative profanity. My security cameras capture everything in crisp, high-definition glory. Some genius in a baseball cap and dark clothing cutting my dock lines with what looks like a kitchen knife, apparently believing that if my dock floats away into the night, it'll magically solve Cordelia's violation problem. The splash of someone fleeing in a small outboard motor echoes across the water, followed by the distinct sounds of panic, poor seamanship, and what might have been someone falling overboard. Whoever Cordelia hired for sabotage clearly hadn't spent much time around boats that fight back. By morning, I've got crystal clear footage of the incident, plus enough evidence to file charges that would make a prosecutor smile. But more importantly, there's something in the air. That metallic smell of fear mixed with the scent of pine trees and poor life choices. Deputy Roy arrives with his coffee and the expression of someone who's about to enjoy his job. Vandalism's a felony when it's part of ongoing harassment, he tells me, reviewing the footage. And this video shows premeditation. Someone's looking at serious jail time. The beauty of Cordelia's desperation is that instead of learning from failure, she escalates like a bad poker player doubling down on a losing hand. Suddenly, local Facebook groups explode with anonymous posts about the dangerous outsider threatening community safety. My mailbox gets stuffed with flyers claiming I'm planning to industrialize the lake and destroy property values. Someone even puts up a banner on the community bulletin board warning about environmental threats from unauthorized water management. The irony tastes sweeter than my morning coffee. Here's a woman embezzling community funds for personal gain, and she's painting me as the threat to property values. But Cordelia's masterpiece of desperation arrives via certified mail, a foreclosure notice claiming I owe $15,000 in accumulated fines, plus attorney fees and administrative costs for violations on property the HOA has no authority over. $15,000 for imaginary violations, on land they don't control, for fees I never agreed to pay. Tommy nearly falls off his chair laughing when I show him the notice. "This is beautiful," he gasps, wiping tears. "She just committed multiple felonies in writing. Fraudulent lien filing, extortion, theft by deception. It's like a greatest hits album of white-collar crime." The pressure is fracturing her support network. Mavis reports that board members are asking uncomfortable questions about legal expenses. The Martinez family received a formal apology for administrative errors. Even Cordelia's golf buddies are backing away like she's radioactive. She's losing control of her own board, Mavis tells me, voice crackling with satisfaction. People want to know why they're hemorrhaging money, fighting one guy over violations that make no sense. Then comes the mini twist that makes everything perfect. The private investigator, apparently tired of minimum wage surveillance work, approaches me at the hardware store. Marcus Webb looks like a man who's realized he's working for the wrong side of a very bad movie. "Mr. Whitmore," he says, glancing around nervously, "I don't usually do this, but your HOA lady is asking me to do things that cross lines, like photographing personal mail, documenting visitors, intimidating people who ask questions about finances." Marcus slides me a manila envelope thick with evidence. "She's not just targeting you. She hired me to gather dirt on anyone questioning her authority. The Martinez family, elderly residents, board members asking about money. It's systematic intimidation." Inside the envelope, surveillance contracts, blackmail instructions, and payment records documenting a coordinated harassment campaign against multiple families. "That's when I knew I had to get out," Marcus says. "Lady's not just corrupt, she's dangerous." Looking at this evidence, I realize Cordelia's desperation has created something beautiful. Complete documentation of her crimes, gathered by someone she paid to commit them. Sometimes justice serves itself. When cornered animals get desperate, they either run or attack with everything they've got. Cordelia Blackwood wasn't the running type. Her nuclear option arrived in the form of an emergency community safety meeting scheduled for the following Tuesday evening. The notice, printed on official HOA letterhead with more red ink than a horror movie poster, declared an immediate vote on emergency eminent domain proceedings to protect community assets from imminent environmental threats. I'm reading this masterpiece of legal fiction while drinking my morning coffee, and I have to admire the sheer audacity. Eminent domain. She's actually claiming the HOA has governmental authority to seize private property for the public good. "Tommy," I call, my voice probably carrying across half the county. "You need to see this latest stroke of genius." Tommy arrives within the hour, takes one look at the notice, and starts laughing so hard he has to sit down. "Ezra, this is beyond illegal. It's so far past illegal that illegal can't see it with a telescope. HOAs don't have eminent domain authority. That's strictly governmental power, and even then it requires years of legal proceedings and just compensation." But here's the terrifying part. Cordelia's betting that most residents don't understand the legal impossibility of what she's proposing. She's gambling that fear, confusion, and her own authority will be enough to ram through a vote that sounds official but has all the legal validity of a monopoly property deed. The meeting notice goes on to explain that my dock and water rights pose an immediate threat to community safety during environmental emergencies, and that decisive action must be taken to protect property values and ensure responsible resource management. She's even invited Channel 7 News to cover the emergency community response to environmental threats. Because nothing says legitimate governmental action, like having television crews document your completely illegal power grab. The smell of desperation is getting stronger than the pine air freshener in my truck. Cordelia's pulled out every stop, called in every favor, and is betting everything on one final spectacular bluff. But while she's been planning her theatrical finale, we've been preparing our own surprise performance. Tommy spent the week ensuring every procedural violation will be documented by neutral witnesses. She's going to violate parliamentary procedure, rush the vote, and ignore legal requirements, he explains. Every violation creates more evidence for criminal charges. Deputy Roy has positioned himself strategically, ready to intervene if things get out of hand. 20 years of law enforcement taught me that desperate people do unpredictable things. When this blows up in her face, she might not handle it well. The community center that Tuesday evening looks like a courtroom designed by someone with a flair for drama. Cordelia's arranged the seating to maximize her supporters' visibility while pushing potential opposition toward the back. Professional lighting equipment from the TV crew makes everything look official and important. The air smells like nervous sweat mixed with the industrial disinfectant they use to mop these floors, plus whatever expensive perfume Cordelia's wearing to mask the scent of impending legal disaster. She's set up at the front with a presentation that would make a corporate lawyer proud. Charts showing environmental risk factors, blown-up photos of my supposedly dangerous dock, and what appears to be a completely fabricated timeline of escalating safety violations. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cordelia begins, her voice echoing off the cheap paneling like a prosecutor announcing capital charges. "We face an unprecedented threat to our community's safety and financial security." She's gesturing at her displays like she's revealing evidence in a murder trial. "This unauthorized water management operation poses immediate environmental risks during drought conditions and threatens to destabilize property values throughout our community." The camera crews are eating it up, filming every dramatic gesture and official-sounding proclamation. Channel 7's reporter, a young guy who clearly thinks he's covering a legitimate government proceeding, is taking notes furiously. "Therefore," Cordelia continues, building toward her crescendo, "the board moves for an emergency vote to assume temporary control of all lake-adjacent properties pending resolution of these environmental and safety concerns." That's when I stand up, Tommy beside me with a briefcase that's about to become Cordelia's worst nightmare. "Point of order," I call out, my voice carrying that command authority they drill into you in the Army. The room goes silent except for the hum of television equipment and someone's nervous cough 3 rows back. "Ms. Blackwood," I continue, "before we vote on imaginary governmental powers, perhaps the community should know about the very real financial crimes that have been funding your legal adventures." Tommy opens the briefcase and pulls out documents that make Cordelia's face cycle through several interesting shades of pale. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announces, "what you're witnessing isn't emergency governance. It's the final act of a 3-year embezzlement scheme." The camera crews suddenly realize they're not covering a community meeting anymore. They're documenting a criminal conspiracy's public collapse. Cordelia's perfectly orchestrated power play just became her public execution. And the best part? She invited the media herself. The moment Tommy announced embezzlement scheme, the community center transformed from a boring HOA meeting into the climax of a crime drama that Hollywood couldn't have scripted better. You could literally hear the air being sucked out of the room. The Channel 7 cameraman, who'd been casually filming what he thought was a routine community dispute, suddenly snapped to attention like he'd just realized he was documenting Watergate. His camera swung toward Tommy with the precision of a guided missile. Cordelia's face went through a spectacular color progression, from perfectly applied foundation to pale white to an angry red that clashed with her silver hair. Her hands, those perfectly manicured instruments of HOA tyranny, started shaking like autumn leaves in a hurricane. "Mr. Whitmore," she stammered, her voice losing that commanding authority she'd wielded like a weapon for years. "These interruptions are out of order. We have important community business to—" "The only business here," I interrupted, standing up to my full height and letting my command voice fill the room, "is explaining to these good people how you've been stealing their money for 3 years. Tommy began spreading documents across the front table like a dealer laying out cards in the world's most expensive poker game. Bank statements, invoices, property records, and email printouts that told the story of systematic theft disguised as community leadership. "Over the past 3 years," Tommy announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd done his homework and brought receipts, "Cordelia Blackwood has funneled approximately $200,000 in HOA funds through shell companies registered to her personal address." The room erupted. Voices overlapped in a chaos of confusion, anger, and disbelief. I caught fragments. 200,000? Our maintenance fees? Is this why my roof leaked all winter? But Tommy wasn't finished. He pulled out the correspondence with Pinnacle Lake Development, and the crowd's murmur turned into something that sounded like a lynch mob warming up. "She's been using your community funds as seed money for a personal real estate development scheme," Tommy continued, his words hitting the crowd like artillery shells. "A scheme that required seizing Mr. Whitmore's century-old water rights to guarantee investor returns." That's when Deputy Roy stepped forward from where he'd been positioned near the back wall, his hand resting casually on his duty belt in a way that suggested this wasn't a social visit. "Ms. Blackwood," Roy's voice carried the weight of official authority, "I have a warrant for financial investigation and evidence seizure related to potential embezzlement, fraud, and theft of community funds." The sound of metal handcuffs being readied is distinctive, a sharp click that cuts through crowd noise like a gunshot. Cordelia's eyes went wide as she realized her theatrical finale had become her arrest scene. The Channel 7 reporter, now fully understanding he was witnessing the story of his career, pushed closer with his microphone. "Ms. Blackwood, do you have a response to these allegations of embezzlement and fraud?" Cordelia's response was perhaps the most honest thing she'd said in years. Complete, speechless panic. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for water. while her perfectly composed mask crumbled in real time on live television. But the crowd wanted answers, and they wanted them now. Mrs. Martinez stood up, her voice shaking with 3 years of suppressed anger. "You made our family's life hell with fake violations while you were stealing from us?" Other voices joined in, a crescendo of fury from people who'd been intimidated into silence finally finding their courage. The elderly Hendersons, young families who'd been targeted for attitude problems, longtime residents who'd watched their community deteriorate under Cordelia's reign of terror. "The environmental emergency you're claiming," I said, pulling out my water monitoring data, "is complete fiction. These scientific measurements prove the lake's ecosystem is stable and has been for over a century. Your consultant's report was fabricated to justify seizing property for your development scheme." Tommy added the final blow. "Every HOA board decision made while Ms. Blackwood was embezzling funds can be legally voided. Every fine, every violation, every fee assessment, all subject to complete reversal and restitution." That's when Cordelia made her final mistake. Instead of maintaining dignity in defeat, she tried one last desperate play. "This is all lies," she screamed, her composure completely shattered. "These documents are fabricated. This man is trying to steal community property that belongs to all of us." The irony was so perfect it practically sparkled. A woman who'd spent 3 years stealing from her neighbors standing in a room full of evidence documenting her crimes, accusing someone else of theft. Deputy Roy stepped forward with handcuffs that gleamed under the television lights. "Cordelia Blackwood, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and theft of community funds." The metallic click of handcuffs closing around her wrists provided the punctuation mark for the end of her reign of terror. The Channel 7 cameras captured every moment as the most powerful person in 3 counties was led away in handcuffs, her white escalades soon to be evidence in a criminal investigation. Justice, it turns out, has excellent timing. 6 months later, I'm standing on that same weathered dock my great-grandfather built, but everything else has changed in the most beautiful way imaginable. The emergency HOA board election happened within 2 weeks of Cordelia's arrest, this time with transparent oversight from the county clerk's office. Mavis Lane was elected president by unanimous vote. Turns out, when you remove fear and intimidation from the equation, people choose leaders who actually care about community welfare. The financial recovery moved faster than anyone expected. Cordelia's seized assets, including that pristine white Escalade and her lakefront mansion built with stolen community funds, generated enough restitution to fully restore the HOA's reserve fund. Better yet, the state attorney general's office recovered additional damages from Pinnacle Lake Development, who'd apparently known they were dealing with embezzled money. The smell of fresh paint and barbecue smoke drifts across the water from the community celebration happening in the park area that used to be Cordelia's private garden. Families who hadn't spoken in years are sharing burgers and laughing together, while kids splash in the lake without fear that some HOA violation notice will appear on their parents' windshields. Tommy's law practice has exploded. Turns out there's huge demand for attorneys who specialize in HOA accountability and community governance reform. He's got cases in 3 counties now, helping other communities escape from petty tyrants who thought clipboards and attitude constituted legal authority. The Whitmore case is becoming a template, Tommy tells me, adjusting his tie that actually fits properly now that he can afford decent clothes. Communities across the state are using our documentation methods to challenge HOA overreach and financial abuse. Deputy Roy got promoted to detective, partly for his exemplary community policing during the investigation. "Turns out solving high-profile financial crime cases is good for career advancement," he says with the satisfied grin of someone who backed the right horse. But the real victory is what we've built from the ashes of Cordelia's corrupt empire. The Mirror Lake Conservation Trust officially launched last month, with yours truly as chairman and a board that includes environmental scientists, community representatives, and legal experts. We've established water rights and environmental protection scholarships for local students, funded through sustainable use fees that actually go toward conservation instead of personal enrichment. The Lake Access Program provides reasonable fishing and recreation privileges for community members while maintaining environmental protection standards. Families can enjoy the water without worrying about arbitrary violations or manufactured emergencies. The restored dock now features a historical marker honoring Silas Whitmore and the original settlement families, along with educational displays about water conservation and environmental stewardship. School groups visit regularly to learn about local history and sustainable resource management. My personal life has taken some interesting turns too. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the environmental educator who helped design our conservation programs, has become a regular fixture around my kitchen table. Turns out shared interests in water management and community service make for pretty solid relationship foundations. The annual Mirror Lake Festival happens this weekend, a celebration of environmental stewardship, community cooperation, and the kind of neighborly spirit that thrives when people aren't afraid of petty bureaucrats with grudges. Local musicians, environmental exhibits, and enough barbecue to feed 3 counties. Children's laughter echoes across water that's been in my family for over a century, now protected in perpetuity through conservation trust structures that provide tax benefits while ensuring future generations can enjoy what my great-grandfather preserved. The technical benefits speak for themselves. Water quality monitoring shows the lake ecosystem is healthier than it's been in decades. Property values have stabilized and increased as the community reputation recovered from Cordelia's reign of terror. Our governance model is being studied by other communities seeking alternatives to adversarial HOA management. But sitting here watching families enjoy the lake without fear, listening to genuine laughter instead of whispered complaints about violation notices, I realize we've accomplished something more valuable than legal victory or financial recovery. We've proven that communities can fight back against petty tyrants and win. We've shown that ordinary people with determination and proper documentation can defeat corruption and restore decent governance.
Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where the HOA Karens meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, go ahead and like the video, drop a comment with your reaction, and hit subscribe so you're ready for the next wild HOA tale.